Every other week, we sit down and talk with Michael Nocella, reporter for the Ithaca Times, about what stories he's been following in and around town. And a few weeks ago, we talked about the IPD's Homeland Security Grant that they're in the running for some tactical equipment. At first, that funding was a pretty innocuous issue, but after a white, out-of-uniform police officer pulled his gun on two black teenagers late one night in early August, the issue became a bit more contentious. The Common Council has made their decision on that funding, but there have been more updates on the after effects of the actual events on August 9th, and the conversation about the relationship between the IPD and the Ithaca community. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
Always a pleasure, Sam.
So, I mentioned the incident on August 9th, and I kind of wanted to start with what's happened in response to that. I understand the city and the mayor did an investigation into that incident, and they've actually released their findings on what actually happened. So I'm wondering if you can lay out for us what they've actually said.
Right, so Mayor Svante Myrick and IPD did an internal investigation which found the officer involved in the August 9th incident, Sergeant John Norman, was ultimately, he was justified in his actions based off their findings. However, there's still a lot of gray area between what their findings really found and what the family's still saying. So it's not like this. It's not like the investigation went and everyone's like, oh yeah, cool. That that's not a concern anymore. And then even kind of emphasizing that, even though Myrick said that he followed the right protocol under current IPD standards, he then went on to propose several reforms that will be rolled out in the coming year to IPD standards, in which IPD took as kind of a backhanded compliment. So there's a lot of moving parts, and this is nowhere near finished.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about what changes Mayor Myrick has actually called for, because there were some pretty specific recommendations he made, correct?
Right. So there are 8 major reforms, and I will kind of rattle them off right now. So the first one would be cameras on officers and in cars, which Myrick notes have proven to reduce the use of police force and reduce the number of complaints against police officers in other departments across the country. The second would be city residency requirement, which would in the future require officers to live within the city to work for the department. This did not sit well with IPD because, as IPD notes, some officers specifically do not want to live within the city for both cost and safety reasons. The third would be a community action team, also known as CAT, which would be 2 officers working together outside the existing beat rotation within the department. And this would allow the department to be more flexible and really kind of work on their community policing, which has been a void within the last few years since their community unit got taken away. Myrick said he's going to do everything he can to find the funding for this by 2015. The fourth would be a downtown outreach social worker. The fifth would be opening a district office on the West End. The sixth would be full review of all policies and procedures leading to formal accreditation. And the seventh would be a 10% increase in police staffing. They've recently hired 3 officers, and they're hoping to add 3 more. They currently have 57, so in total, those 6 officers would represent a 10% increase. And the 8th would just be improved community outreach programming in the department as is.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that the IPD reacted to some of these recommendations kind of negatively. I'm wondering if we can maybe highlight some of the contentions that IPD had with these recommendations. I know you mentioned the residency requirement, but how did they feel about the requirement that they now wear video cameras?
I think the quote was, the president of the Ithaca Police Benevolent Association, Officer John Jolly, he noted that the topic of putting cameras on officers in the car was certainly a topic worth exploring, and there may be value in doing this. However, they say that they don't understand how cameras would decrease the amount of time officers must spend on paperwork, as Myrick noted in his proposal. So it sounds like something that they might be willing to explore, but it's also something that they still seem to be a little bit confused with.
Yeah, and for that residency requirement, you mentioned that the Police Benevolent Association brought up this issue of officer safety. Can we maybe tease that out a little bit? How would that make an officer unsafe to live in the city of Ithaca?
I think from their point of view, the logic is, let's say an officer has a situation where they arrest an individual or a group of individuals for an incident, and those individuals then get let go of their charges or serve their time and get released back into public. I guess the concern would be that those individuals, whether justified or not, would seek revenge on the officer that arrested them. So I think I understand that rationale, and it is kind of a touchy subject to have a city employee have to live in the city. Some people might like to live in Caroline and get their space from the city and enjoy that commute every day, and I feel that's a right that anyone working any job should have. On the other side, I do understand that, if you're living within the city that you're protecting, if you walk home from the police department every day, you're more likely to see faces and be familiar with the residents and kind of maybe develop that bond that so many people are saying doesn't exist right now. So there's kind of two sides of the coin, and there's pros and cons to each.
And that community connection is something I wanted to talk about next. So, understanding that the IPD and the Police Benevolent Association has reacted to Svante's recommendations thusly, what's the community said about the city's investigation, and in particular, maybe some of the recommendations that have been made for how the IPD can change the way they operate?
A lot of things have been said within the public. There were recently a rally held at Congo Square Market at the end of the month, and then another one at GIAC. The mothers of the boys arrested on August 9th spoke at GIAC before that rally, and basically they're still, from the community's point of view, these residents aren't happening instantaneously, so it's one of those things that's, it's where, hey, these would be great, but they're not going to help today, and there's still a lot of confusion, and a lot of people are still in the dark on what exactly happened on August 9th, even though this investigation was done. Really, the nitty-gritty of that investigation wasn't released to the public, just the ultimate conclusion. The community police board still has to conduct their own investigation. No one really knows when that's going to be concluded. So the mothers are still upset. The colored demographic of the city is still, I think outraged is a fair word for it. If you've been to any of these rallies or talks, there's people are crying, people are shouting. There's a lot of confusion. Many people in the city still feel fear. They've said they fear the police, and it's just kind of a crazy situation that at this point I don't really see any end in sight. I know there's some other talks planned early in this month, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be going away anytime soon.
I'm interested, finally, if we can talk a little bit more about the connection that the IPD actually has with the community. I know you wrote a piece in the Times that touched on the kind of relationship that the police department does actually have with the city of Ithaca when they're not actively policing. So if we think about improving that relationship between officers with the IPD and citizens of Ithaca, regardless of which neighborhood they live in, what are community members asking for? Are they just asking for cops to come up and say, hey, or is it something else?
Two of the more well-known pillars in the community for community youth, especially multicultural youth, is GIAC and the Southside Center. That's where a lot of the community's children hang out, play basketball, get involved in programming. And that's also, coincidentally, where a lot of police incidences have, whether it's drug dealing complaints or just complaints of noise. Officer Jamie Williamson said those areas are two of the more reported complaints for the city, so it's really impossible to ignore. That said, there was a time when IPD officers would, on a regular basis, go to read to kids in GIAC and Southside Center and really try to develop a rapport with kids. They would maybe spend a day at either facilities, day camps, or, just hang out while kids play basketball, maybe even shoot some hoops with them, take a shot, and then get back to their beat. The way it's been explained to me now, the staffing at IPD, which IPD describes as mission critical, is just they're running on fumes, and their officers are running call from call to call to call. So they don't have time to get out of their car and have these casual relationships with these kids. And it's kind of having a trickle-down effect, and it's definitely something where you can say, yeah, it definitely has an effect on the community and certainly doesn't help in preventing something like August 9th. So it is something that both IPD and the mayor are aware of. And if you read through the mayor's proposal, you will see kind of the undertones that community policing is one of the bigger weaknesses within the department right now. And it would be the hope that the addition of 6 officers and 2 officers for a community action team would ultimately change that dynamic and help bring it back to where it was a few years ago when they had a community policing unit. Until that time, it's been explained to me from IPD that the dynamic that out there now is the dynamic that will be out there today and tomorrow and the next day until this increased staff gets to have its impact and until these reforms are actually brought to fruition.
And thinking about what comes next in this story and actually putting some of these reforms into practice, what's it really going to take to push these things through? Can we expect changes to happen in 6 weeks, in 6 months, or even longer than that?
Well, like anything else, it seems in this world it comes down to dollars. Officers don't come cheap, and either do initiatives. So the next thing to keep your eye out for to see if any of these things really come to fruition would be the 2015 budget. I know the mayor has hinted that about a 1% decrease in terms of funding across the board for programming in the city, including IPD. So it will be very interesting to see how they will manage to increase staffing within IPD while also being limited from the financial dollars. They might have to look to outside money. I don't know how that's going to work. All I know is that there are definitely financial restrictions, but at the same time, it sounds like Myrick's determined to make this a priority. So it will definitely be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and this is something that I'm sure we will continue to talk about, as it does. Well, I've been speaking with Michael Nocella of the Ithaca Times about what's been happening in the wake of the incident on August 9th, where a white, out-of-uniform police officer pulled his gun on 2 black teenagers. Michael will continue to follow this story, and again, his work on this story can be read in the pages of the Ithaca Times. Michael, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having me, Sam.